How to hunt in bad weather with your crossbow. That's this episode of Death by Bunjie. I have had a lot of questions recently about how to hunt with a crossbow in bad weather, whether you can go out in the rain with it, whether you should take it in the snow, whether you should take it in cold temperatures or even hot temperatures on our Facebook page and here on the YouTube channel. So I figured now's a great time of year to do a video on hunting with a crossbow in bad weather. Now, despite the fact that the sun is blazing today, it is a beautiful, beautiful January day. The sun's out here, it's melting the recent snow and all that good stuff, but nonetheless, it is still the late season. The temperatures are dropping into the 20s and 30s when I'm out there hunting. And some of you folks I talk to up in Canada are hunting in 10 below zero and all that good stuff. Folks in Michigan are hunting in 0-degree weather and even colder than that. And even the people in Ohio and the people down in West Virginia who I've talked to, a few of them are hunting in weather that is much colder than what they were expecting. So it's kind of nice to have winter. It's kind of nice to have seasons. I live in northeastern Pennsylvania, love the seasons, love crossbow hunting, and now is the time to enjoy crossbow hunting like no other. Can you hunt in bad weather with a crossbow? Yes, you absolutely can. In fact, it is a lot of fun. It's a blast. The first half of January here in Pennsylvania, we have our late season. It's typically a season for the flintlock muzzleloader people, but crossbows are allowed, archery equipment is allowed as well, so I call it the late crossbow season. You've seen me hunt in some pretty bad weather. In Maryland a couple years ago, I was hunting down there and I got rain like you would not believe. I sat through some of the toughest rain I've ever seen in my life with the crossbow here, and we made it through just fine. Every year I go out in the late season as well to hunt with Bunjie. We go out and sit in the blind or sit in the tree stand, sit in some pretty rough conditions and have a good time. But hunting with a crossbow in bad weather is really not a problem. These crossbows in this day and age, most of them are made out of such tremendous, awesome materials. This thing performs, in my experience, just as well in 80-degree, 90-degree heat as it does at 0 degrees. So the materials that they use to make these crossbows are phenomenal. Now, to get the most out of your crossbow during the late season, during those bad weather conditions, there's a few precautions you want to take before, during, and after you go hunting to make sure that your crossbow is properly protected. The first thing I think you're going to want to make sure you do is wax your string. If you've got a compound crossbow, wax the cables. I just did another video last week about that, so you can make sure you watch that if you haven't seen it already. Go through and do all that waxing. Another very important thing, obviously, let's lube the rail if it needs it. Let's make sure we've got a nice, even, light sheen of rail lube on there to make sure that it's going to move properly. Not too much, because if it's too cold, that stuff will freeze. So you want to make sure that that is done properly as well. On that note, for most of us, if it is not too cold, and I'm talking 20 degrees below zero and farther, if it's not that cold, then you probably are going to want to go ahead and use a little bit of crossbow oil on your trigger mechanism, put a little bit on your safety, make sure that you've got your cams lubricated if you have a compound crossbow, so that all that stuff is going to function. Most of those oils will not freeze until you get down well below zero, and I'm talking Fahrenheit here. If you're up in Alaska, or you're in Saskatchewan, or you're someplace up north where it's really, really cold, and we're talking like 20 degrees below zero and farther down. In those instances, you may want to either get special oil or scrap the oil altogether, because that oil can start to gel up, just like it does in your fuel tank, just like it does elsewhere. If that starts to gel up, that's going to jeopardize the performance of your crossbow. So other than that, though, I do think you'd want to add a little bit of oil on there just to make sure that all those things are going to function smoothly. Before I go hunting, one of the first things I do in the morning when I wake up or whatever, I bring the crossbow out, set it on the porch out here all alone, so it just sits there and let it gradually adjust to the temperature before I start cocking it and start working with it. Let it acclimate a little bit by setting it out on a porch. That will also help your scope get to the right temperature, so you don't see it fogging up as soon as you go outside, or fogging it up as soon as you look through it and put the heat of your face up against it or whatever. It will help with that too, as long as it's properly adjusted. I try to shoot the crossbow periodically throughout the season to make sure that it's still accurate. I think it's even more important in the late season. Nobody wants to go out there and stand in the yard and take a bunch of shots when it's really, really cold, but you really kind of have to do that. It's a very important time of year to make sure that the crossbow is still performing properly. So after it's sat out there, after it's acclimated, after it's gotten comfortable with the temperature, take a couple of test shots, one at 10, one at 30 yards, whatever, a couple at 20, whatever, just to make sure that it still seems like it's performing properly. Then head out there and chase those deer. Now, during the hunt, what do we do when we're out there actually hunting? What do we do to protect that crossbow? You have seen here on Death by Bunjie that in the cold seasons, in the cold weather, what I like to do is hunt from a blind. Not everybody wants to do that, but it is a great way to enjoy the late season, a great way to enjoy bad weather. I always have a few blinds set up. I still hunt from a tree stand, and I think that tree stands they certainly have their place, there's no question about that. But hunting from a blind has its place in rain because it keeps your camera gear dry, it keeps the crossbow dry, it keeps you dry. So the blind is very effective for that, as well as when it's snowing or when the wind is blowing really bad. The blind will help keep that off of you, keep you protected from that bad weather. Just like it does that, it helps protect the crossbow as well. One of the most important things to do is make sure you're keeping all of the water off the scope the best you can. Don't let rain build up inside the front of the lens here on that lip or in the back, because then you're gonna have a hard time looking through that scope. It will also cause condensation if the temperature is just right, so and you'll get some fog on the lens and you won't be able to hunt if that's the case. So keeping that scope covered is important. You can use lens caps to do that, right? Mine comes with lens caps that I can snap right on there, and you can take those off before you get ready to take a shot, or when the bad weather ends, whatever. Some of them have flip up and flip down lens caps as well. You can buy those and put those on there. Cold weather, I always wear a face mask, down that I pull up over my face. Don't pull it up over your nose if you're looking through that scope. When you go to look through the scope, when you're breathing out, the heat from your breath is going to rise right up out of that mask, and it's going to hit that scope and fog it up instantly. To protect against that, I just pull that down below my nose so that the air can just dissipate instead of hitting that lens. The only other real important thing while you're hunting is to make sure you don't have a buildup of snow or ice on the limbs or on the arrow. Occasionally, even if you got the crossbow cocked, you might want to take that arrow off, shake it good, get the thickest of the snow and all that stuff off there, put it back together. Keep your shots shorter in bad weather, and the accuracy won't be affected that long. If you've got a little bit of water on your arrow and you take a 20-yard shot, it's going to perform pretty good for you in the field. But if you're taking a 50-yard shot, everything that affects accuracy gets worse the farther out those shots go. If your scope's off a little bit, maybe at 20 yards you won't notice it, but at 50 yards you're going to see a big difference. It magnifies every problem a lot the longer your shots go. So keep your shot short in the late season in bad weather, and you'll be much better off as well. But a little bit of moisture won't affect those shorter shots as much, but you do want to keep all the obstructions off here. Make sure that there is no snow buildup on the limbs. Make sure that there's no snow or ice on the rail or on the arrow. You should be okay. Last but not least, just like I did when I was in Maryland, carry a rain poncho with you. If it gets really, really bad, I cover up all my gear. In Maryland, we got in some really, really bad rain down there, and I ended up piling all my gear, including the crossbow, right there in the middle of the woods because I couldn't get out of the woods in time, and I covered it all up with my poncho, and my gear stayed nice and dry. My cameras were dry, the crossbow was dry. The only thing that wasn't dry was me. And my GoPro. That was it. So everything else was nice and dry. Carry a little emergency poncho. You can buy one for like 99 cents at a gas station half the time. Get one of those things, throw it in your bag, and that way you've got it. You can use parts of that, cut it out, and use a small portion of that just to cover the lens and just to cover the lenses and the scope, the whole area here. Sort of lay that over the thickest part of the crossbow here, the guts of the crossbow. Lay that little piece of plastic over it during the thickest of the bad weather. You can quickly remove it if deer are coming your way or if animals are coming your way. You can quickly remove it and be ready to hunt. Just another little tip, but be prepared for that kind of stuff. And now, the most important part of hunting in bad weather with your crossbow, the most important thing from the crossbow's perspective, is what do you do after you go hunting? What do you do then to protect your crossbow so that it's ready to use next time you want to go hunting, and so that it can survive those bad weather conditions in perfect shape? What do you do afterwards? The first thing I do when I get back from hunting in the woods and everything is wet, I get all my gear out of the way, but the first thing I do is dry off the crossbow entirely, including the rail. You can always add more rail lube later. Go ahead and dry everything out. Dry those limbs, dry the string with a clean washcloth, hand towel. Dry everything off, including the trigger mechanism. You do the best you can. Run the cloth right up under here and just clean the entire thing off, including the scope and the lenses. Don't forget to clean out that shooting rail. With water down in there, I'm always surprised at how many hemlock needles, those little needles off those trees, I get down in this shooting rail. But make sure you get a Q-tip or whatever, dry that out and push everything out of there, clean that shooting rail out. It'll gather stuff like you wouldn't believe, especially when it gets wet. It seems like it becomes a magnet to hold stuff. So clean all that stuff off good. Then I just set it somewhere over one of the heat vents, not in direct heat, okay? You don't want to set it next to the stove, nothing like that, but set it in a dry room where there's going to be some air circulation near one of the heat vents where the air is going to circulate a little bit and dry this thing off. Leave it there overnight. Then when I'm done with that, what I do after it's all dried off nicely and it's sat a little bit, get the crossbow oil out and I put a little dab in there in the safety mechanism, a little bit in the trigger assembly, put a little bit of oil in there. I hit all the bolts and screws and go over and touch all the metal bolts and screws over the entire crossbow with a little dab of that crossbow oil just to protect them, just to keep them from rusting. Do that and you won't see any rust develop on your crossbow. Now the scope needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Just like I clean my camera gear, I've got special cloths and little lens cleaners and stuff like that. Start with a little brush, then I go through and clean the lens like you normally would, just like I would do with my camera lenses. And then you get some nice clean breath on there, breathe on the lens, wipe it down with one of the smooth cloths, and then your scope is good to go. Don't wax that string again until it is completely dried out. Then go ahead and wax it again before you go hunting in that bad weather. If it's tacky, if you can feel it sticking to your fingers, and if you can feel a little residue on your fingers when you're done touching that string, then it's good to go. It doesn't need any wax unless you see some fraying. You might want to touch it up a little bit. And then the last thing you do until you're ready to go hunting next time is store your crossbow in a nice dry place, either in a nice case or hang it on the wall, someplace where it's not going to get bumped, but someplace where it's nice and dry in the house. I don't store mine outside. I know a lot of people do, and if it works for them, that's fine. But I like to store it inside so it stays at room temperature, but just in a place where it's not going to get bumped, in a place where it's going to stay nice and dry. And it will continue to perform perfectly. So hunting in bad weather is no problem whatsoever for crossbow hunters. Go out there and enjoy it. It is one of the best times of year, if you ask me, to go hunting. And I will tell you also, that's what this is all about. Go out there and have a good time. If you're not having fun, it certainly is not worth doing. That's the reason that I do this. I hunt with a crossbow because I find it very enjoyable. So go out there and have some fun hunting with your crossbow in bad weather. Well, I hope you got a lot out of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you go out there and I hope you have a lot of fun hunting in bad weather, hunting in the late season, just like I intend to do. Make sure you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Subscribe to Death by Bunjie and check out our Facebook page. It's a lot of fun. We're having a lot of fun on there as well. Check out the Twitter account if you haven't done so already. And until next time, all hail Bunjie!
The second state is number one in my book.